All right, today we're going to talk about factoring trinomials in standard form. So that's your ax squared plus bx plus c. And let's get started with a couple different ways. One way you may have learned or seen online is an x method. We'll talk about that in a second. But there's also other ways too. I'll show you both ways. You pick which way you're more comfortable with. All right, so first we're going to get started with our example. Is 4x squared minus 15x plus 9. So, step 1, always check for GCF. 4, 15, 9, they don't have anything in common, so there's no GCF. So now we're going to go into step 2. So we have to figure out how to get a term. So here in this case, A is 4, B is negative 15, and C is 9. So what we have to do is we have to figure out what A times C is. And we take A times C. Well, 4 times 9 is 36. So that's going to be one part we need. The second part we need is B. B is negative 15, and so that's what we're looking for. So in order to factor this trinomial, we have to find two numbers that multiply to 36, but when you combine them, they equal negative 15. So one way to do that is you could list the factors of 36. Well, we have 1 and 36, we have 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. So I just listed all the factors. So if you were to do that, we need to figure out which way can we multiply to 36. Well, they all multiply to 36, so that doesn't really help us. But when combined, it's negative 15. Well, I've got 3 and 12 here. If you were to make both of those negative, it would actually work. Negative 3x and negative 12 equals 15. So negative 15 here. So I'm going to use this, but I'm going to make them both negative. All right. So now, once you get here, and notice, we're going to break this negative 15. We said if we make this a negative 12x, and we make this a negative 3x, that's your negative 15 there. Now, once you get to this part, now you can start grouping. And that's what we did last lesson. So since there's no GCF, we don't have to factor that out. We should have already done that. But now we're going to start grouping. So we're going to take these two and put them in parentheses here. And we're going to take these two and put the parentheses here. Now notice I left this negative outside because we typically don't want that number to be negative. If it is, you factor it out. So then I'm going to take GCF of those two, which is 4x. And then I'm going to take the GCF of these two, which is negative 3. And now I'm going to take this and make that. And then everything else, this should be the same thing inside the parentheses, equals that. So it's a lot of steps, and then finding which numbers to use is probably the most challenging part of this. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's just do number 1, and then I'm going to do number 4 for you, and then you can pick whichever way you like as far as factoring to figure out what numbers to use. So let's get started with number 1. Is there a GCF? I've got 6x, 21x, and 9. Well, yeah, they all have 3 in common. So my GCF is 3. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to factor out a 3 for each term. All right, so now let's do this part where if it multiplies, we're going to get AC, A times C, so A would be, I'll just make this A here, times C is 6, and then B is 7. So now we've got to figure out what multiplies to give you 6, but if you add it together for 7, so if you were to look for your factors for 6, For 6, you've got 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and 3 and 2. So we need to figure out which ones can we use. Let's use 1 and 6, and it's positive 7. So that means they both need to be positive. So now let's go ahead and break this. And I'm going to pick the 6 is going to go with the 2x. Because they're both even, so I know I can factor that out. Oop, okay. And I still have my 3 there. And then this is going to factor over here. We said 6 and 1. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's factor within. So for here, I've got a 2x and a 2x. And then whatever is left over, I've got x plus 3. And then for here, I've got an x plus 3. Well, there's really nothing to factor out except for a positive 1. And we do need another term, so make sure you write that x in there. All right, and then lastly, don't forget to bring this 3 down from before. All right, let's put it all together. I've got 3. I've got 2x, because it's outside the parentheses, plus 1. Oops, hello. And then that is times whatever is in the parentheses. Those two should be the same. And then this is your final answer. All right, so that's one way to do it. You're going to do, once I show you how to do this one, you're going to do that up here. Or you can do either way you like. For number 4, this is the same thing. It's just a different way of writing it. So let's check GCF. I've got 2x, 5x, 3. There's no GCF, so we're going to leave it as is. So now we want to think about, for number 4, what would a times c be? So a times c is 2 times negative 3. So I can do it this way. So a times c is negative 6. All right, and then b, we said you just have to add. So it needs to get to positive 5. And now I need to think, what two numbers can I do negative 6 and positive 5? So in that case, it would be it would be 6 and negative 1. So because if you were to go here, positive 6 and negative 1 will give you 5. So I'm going to go positive 6, negative 1. So these would be your two factors. So I'm going to break this into two different parts. And I'm going to put the 6x here because the 2x is even. So I know I can at least factor an even number out. And then this one, I'm going to make it a negative x because that's your negative 1, right? And then I'll leave it like that. Minus 3. Oops. All right, so remember I said we need to factor that negative 1 out. So let's factor that negative 1. And then you are left with x plus 3. And then here, we're going to factor out a 2x. And I've got x plus 3 here. So let's go ahead and then let's write all that. Oh, I meant to do that. All right, so let's write this all together. 2x minus 1. That's one set. And then your other set should be, these two should be the same. And then that's how you factor it down. All right, now let me do this one for number 5. And again, I don't care which way you use. If the X helps keep you organized, use that. If you like using this way, use that. Either way, whatever works for you. All right, so let's do 5 real quick. I'll get you started. So for 5, GCF, there's none. All right, so then let's go ahead, let's multiply. We've got A is 6, and then B is -5. So now let's go ahead and let's figure out what factors we need to use. So in this case, 5 can be broken apart, or -5, excuse me. -5 can be broken apart into -3 and -2. And then I'm going to bring the rest down. And then we go ahead, make that. So now let's go ahead and start factoring. Now I could have switched these where I had the 2 x's together and the 3's together. Either way, this would have worked. So however you choose to do it, it's up to you. But now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to factor out an x. And I'll have 2x minus 3. And then here, I'm going to factor out, remember we need to factor out that negative. So we're going to factor out a -1. And we'll have a a 2x minus 3. And the goal is, again, however it would have worked out, you should still have the same things in the parentheses when you factor this. Oops. And then that's it. All right, so again, you're going to do the problems I did not do. And I don't care which way you use to factor, you do what you're comfortable with as long as you're getting the correct answer. And then for this one is a little different because we do have a GCF. So here, GCF is going to be 2. So I'm first going to factor out a 2 right from the get-go. All right, now that we've got that, our AC is 18. Our B is -11. So what multiplies to give you 18 but combines to give you -11? So we're going to split that guy into -9 and -2. And then now let's bring down the rest. And don't forget this 2 right here. Make sure you bring that down. All right, now let's go ahead and let's start factoring. So I've got my 2 outside. And then I'm going to look at 3x squared and -9. And I'm going to pull out a 3x. And what is left over is x. Oh, sorry, I put the parenthesis in the wrong spot. Okay, let's try this again. Sorry. I got excited with my parentheses here. All right, so we factored out a 3x, so I have x minus 3 left over. All right, now we're going to go ahead, and then from here, we're going to look at -2x and 6. So I'm factoring out a -2. And then what's left over is x plus 3, x minus 3. And then I think we got everything there. Okay, so again, quick check. You should have the same thing inside your parentheses. So now let's go ahead. I've got 2. And then our parenthesis should be 3x minus 2 And then whatever is left over, or the other two things in your parentheses, is going to go here. So that's a lot of steps. And just be careful how you do it. What you're going to do is you're going to practice and you're going to do all the other problems down here. So make sure you get all these problems done. And remember, greatest common factor. What do you multiply AC to get, but you combine to get B? Then you're going to split it apart and then factor out each individual. And remember, what is inside the parentheses go here. Whatever is left over or whatever you divide by goes out there, and then put it all together. And that's how you factor trinomials in standard form.